This show is brought to you by Safety FM.
Hi listeners, this is Brent Sutton. Welcome to the 55th episode of the Practice of Learning Teams podcast show. It has been 1 year since the launch of the book and the podcast show, The Practice of Learning Teams, with my co-authors and host Glynis McCarthy and Brent Robinson. And what a ride it has been. And who said launching a new venture was a bad idea during a pandemic? We now have over 6,000 regular listeners from 38 countries and 100,000 plus downloads of the content. We thank you for connecting in each week to listen and learn in the new view of safety. Please sit back and enjoy this roundup of my favourite listens in our first year. Let's recap on episode 9 with Sam Goodman, the hop nerd, who I now call my safety brother.
Because the small stuff's always going to be there.
Yeah.
You know, I make bad choices every day, but I'm okay about it.
Well, you know, yeah, me too. I make tons of them. we spend, to what we were even touching on before, I mean, we spend so much time organizationally focused on those little things, right? We too much time, back to that point that we were kind of even driving towards, that, you know, practitioners saying, well, where will I have the time? Well, it's back to focusing on the things that actually matter.
Yeah.
Right? It's back to focusing on the things that matter. I don't know. It just seems like if I'm approached with two buckets of the shit that kills me and the shit that doesn't, I know which one I'm going to focus on.
Yes.
I'm not going to spend time on my toe stubs and my scrapes and my little kind of basic stuff. I'm going to spend time focusing on the stuff that actually kills me, the stuff that matters, at least matters more.
Yeah.
Right. Again, I'm not saying that, you know, look, if you've got like this god awful pit that people have to navigate across to get into your job location, you should probably put a bridge across it. Yeah, for sure. That might make sense. I mean, you can for sure deal with that. I'm not saying not to deal with that stuff. But at the end of the day, it's to me, it always falls back to focusing on the stuff that matters and understanding that those two, you know, by managing the little things, you're really having no impact on the larger things. Right? It's breaking down that belief, right? We've maintained that belief organizationally, especially for a very long time, and within the safety profession, we've promoted that belief for a very long time, that if you just take care of those small things, right, then you're not going to work your way up that pyramid, right? You're not going to work your way up to that dreaded fatality if you just focus on if you don't have any first aids, you'll be fine.
Yeah, absolutely. So we touched on earlier that we put lots of barriers and we put lots of mitigations, we put lots of controls. I feel that they're currently being imbalanced between the prevention side versus response recovery. But even across both, a lot of them actually don't serve any purpose. They're fluff. They're stuff that doesn't matter. But people say to me, well, how to work out what stuff does and doesn't matter? So that sort of led to us to develop that shit filter, okay? Which was to basically say, and it goes back to those core principles, and we ask ourselves, are those mitigations about controlling how the hazard releases energy, or are those mitigations about trying to influence the person?
Yeah.
And the stuff that influences a person is filtered out through the shit filter.
Yeah, that's excellent. Yeah, excellent. And I think even with that, I find myself asking folks, well, okay, wait a second, hold on. Why are we doing this to the worker? Right? Let's stop for a second. We're extracting safety up on the worker. We're doing this to the worker. Let's talk about exactly kind of where you're going, right? Let's talk about, are we actually controlling the energy? Right? Are we actually dealing with the hazard? I don't know. That seems more important to me than a tick and flick check sheet. It's just me. I don't think you can make me any more aware by adding another box to the check sheet. Right? That's not going to make me more aware to the hazards, or less likely to die.
Unless the check sheet has some property to it that stops energy coming through it.
I can wad it up and shove it in the end of the pipe.
Yeah, absolutely. That might be the answer.
Unless the piece of paper would come in handy in a steam generating station, and I can tape it to the end of a stick and walk with it to see if there's a steam leak in front of me.
Yeah.
Right, that's maybe the only way that the check sheet's going to be of any value.
So when we split those two things out, then we ask some really interesting questions. We say to people, okay, so the stuff that doesn't matter, okay, which is what you're using, because there's stuff influencing people, we then ask this really interesting question. Is it an action? Are we asking someone to do something? Is it a process? Are we asking someone to follow something? Or is it a goal? Are we asking something to focus on an outcome? And they look at me and saying, well, it's obvious. Well, no, it's not obvious. What is it?
Yeah.
What is it? Yeah. Because I'm quite happy with things that are action-based. I mean, if I know that, I've got say a big piece of machinery and it jams 10 times a day, I'm quite happy to know that when I open that gate, that gate de-energizes that machine for me. Okay, that's an action. I'm quite happy. Okay, I don't need to think about how it de-energizes or why it de-energizes. All I need to know is that my action as I do this, I've got to clear the jam. I can be effective and efficient, and it's going to work 100% of the time. The alternative is, before you open the gate, you've got to complete your 8-step lockout tagout procedure. You've got to get your padlock and you've got to fit it to it.
Yeah.
Now I've got to clear this jam 10 times a day. Okay. Now you're asking me to be 100% reliable, 7 days a week, 8 hours a day.
Bad position to be in.
Correct.
Yeah, it's a horrible position to be in. But the crazy thing is that organizations do that every day.
And
I think that's the more stunning
happens.
part to me, how often that's relied upon.
Yeah.
We rely upon operators to be 100% right 100% of the time to make sure nothing goes wrong. And that just seems, it doesn't seem, it absolutely is, kind of as we're saying, that is just a horrible position to be in. That's a horrible.
Well, it's more horrible if it's a life-changing event.
Yeah,
it's not horrible if it's a tickle or a slip. Makes sense.
Yeah.
That's
probably an okay place for that if it's going to just kind of reach out and give you.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I'm okay. I mean, I see it all the time. You walk in, particularly these office areas where you want to make yourself a coffee or a cup of tea, and it's got the big sign, caution, hot water. I mean,
I hope.
Yeah, I mean,
you're probably like me. You've been into some of these places where hot water is not always a thing. So I hope that it has hot water in that trailer.
Well, I've worked on the theory that if I'm having a hot drink, I expect the water to be hot.
Right.
And normally most taps are designed with a colour and a direction. And when I get it wrong, I'm okay that I feel some pain getting it wrong because it's a reminder to me about focusing. But to me, no life is going to be lost because of that hot tap. Right. So that's where we keep going back. Let's focus on stuff that really matters. So we've got stickies, stuff that kills you. But for that sticky, within that sticky, there have to be things that really matter within that sticky. And that's that evolution, and that's about having that richer conversation. And then once you understand the stuff that really matters, then from an organisational point of view, then that's where your metrics can come in. The metrics, can be, for instance, how many times a day is the gate being activated? Okay? Is that telling us that the machine, the tolerance of the machine is changing? Make sense? Yeah. So those metrics should be able to allow the organisation to say there is a learning opportunity. There has been a shift from here to here in this period of time. That is a learning opportunity. Does that make sense? So
absolutely.
I'm good for metrics. I love a good metric. as long as it serves a purpose. And I don't know if people understand what purpose they actually serve.
Well, yeah. So that to me, that's a big piece of it. Coming from that world of heavily metrics-driven organizations, there's that delicate balance, right? When we get into incentivized metrics, and we're talking about two little bit different things here. But same thing with that gate. I mean, if we put a financial incentive on that gate not being activated so many times a day, it's just not going to get reported. And if there's a means to have it reported instantly, digitally through sensor or otherwise, right, we're going to find a way to work around that as well. Right? So if we incentivize the metric in a different direction. So to your point, I agree with you. I think metrics can be absolutely valuable things if applied correctly, and I think that's probably the deeper conversation the organization has to have with themselves.
Yeah.
Because currently, where we find ourselves applying metrics currently is under more traditional safety approaches, and we incentivize metrics around recordability rates. We incentivize metrics around basically just don't tell us stuff. Right. We ultimately pay people to not report things to us a lot of times.
In episode 20, we started one of our very first special podcasters, and we looked at Oz Month, and one of our early guests was Deirdre Lewis. And I have to say that Deirdre inspired us to carry on our series and create the women's series on learning teams, the new view with Glynis McCarthy.
So we've sort of been on we've had a lot of discussions over the last probably 2 or 3 years around how we can learn better as an organisation, and really trying to get our heads around what that can look like and what tools we can use. And we're probably floundering around a little bit to kind of think about how we can learn more deeply from what we were doing. So we were thinking we were learning, but not really learning. We were probably sharing more than we were learning, I would say. So I guess went and really did a little bit of research, read some stuff. Was looking at the work that Todd Conklin had been doing around asking better questions, and really thought, well, I'm going to have a crack at this. There was a couple of big things that were going on at the time when we first started to really have a go, and we started having a look. The very first one we did actually was during last year's bushfire season in Australia, and our team just did a tremendous job managing, and being resilient in the face of such a huge crisis. So rather than leaving that opportunity on the table, we didn't have anything bad happen in terms of our people or our facilities were safe. I really wanted to learn from what we were doing well, and really understand why that actually happened in our organisation, and how we were adapting and being resilient in the face of such a crisis across a huge amount of the Australian context. So we had a number of our big facilities and some of our smaller facilities at risk from the fires. That's kind of where we started. And I engaged our operational teams at the sites, and essentially we just pulled together a learning team. We were trying to do it face-to-face, but with everything going on, we ended up doing it virtually. So our very first experience as a learning team was a virtual experience, and so that's really how we started it, and really just took guidance from some of the materials that were out there in books and through podcasts and just things that we've been listening to. So that's really the start of the journey, I guess, for us.
So you're really just giving it a go? Yeah,
so it was more that things were being pushed out into the business through the usual safety artifacts, so things like alerts or notices or things that. They just go out into the business, and we would share things with people that they might have a chat in a toolbox talk about them, but it wasn't any deeper than that. It was more, this happened in this place, and these are the 1 or 2 things that maybe you can do over here, but it was no more than that, really. It felt very much on the surface, and certainly from an operational perspective, as well as from a perspective, there was a fair bit of frustration about that, feeling like all these all this work and effort was going into something that pretty much just kind of sent out and went into the ether a little bit. So we knew that there was some opportunity that we were essentially leaving on the table, and that's really where that deeper conversation started to occur around how do we actually really learn a bit better.
So from what I'm hearing, basically the difference between the sharing and the learning, one was about the context, getting that deeper, richer conversation going.
Yeah.
And the second one is, to me, it sounds like active feedback.
Yeah, definitely feedback from the people who are involved in these things, as well as from the safety team, as well as the HSC team. Yeah.
Right. So that it became more of a two-way conversation.
Yeah, I think as an organisation, we've actually had a journey where that two-way conversation happens pretty well between the functional team and the frontline. But I think what we didn't have was really any mechanism we didn't feel like we had a mechanism to actually help to propel us from sharing into learning. And that's really where I think the learning team's process is starting to come into its own from our perspective as an organisation, because it gives us a way to actually delve deeper into what's actually going on versus having a more surface level discussion.
Right. And this thing about giving it a go, how did that sit with leadership? How did we prepare leadership for what giving it a go looks like?
Well, so it depends on what you mean by leadership. And I think like there's levels of leadership. Mostly I just didn't gazette it too broadly. I just said, this is what we're going to do. Are you on board? Let's have a crack at something different. That was kind of where it started. So it wasn't like I went, okay, we're going to do this whole new thing. It was more, okay, let's have a crack at trying to learn more deeply into this. We kind of feel like we did a good job. Let's understand, how we got there. And so I think doing it around the first one in particular, doing it around something that the business felt that they'd done very successfully was a really good place to start, because there was no opposition there was no fear, I think, as well. So people were they wanted to embrace the fact that they'd done something really well and to celebrate it and to learn why that was the case. So I think it was a really good thing to start with, if you like.
And wrapping up the series, in episode 17, was one of Canada's favourite sons of safety, Mr. Jeffrey Lith.
Hi guys, thanks for having me.
Well, look, it's our pleasure. And look, I've been really keen to get you on the show for quite some time. Basically for the listeners to hear about all the good things that you were doing in your neck of the woods.
What did we talk about? What did we say about overpromising? What did we say about that, Brent?
And of course, you've appeared a couple of times with Dr. Todd Conklin.
Correct.
And obviously, you're doing some amazing work in the whole sort of HOP and the learning team space. And I thought it was really valuable for the listeners to basically hear about how your journey started.
Happy to share. Yeah, absolutely. Happy to share whatever I can. It's all a work in progress, and I think the more our community stays together and shares and we have dialogue like this, the better. So, like I say, we're really just honored to be here.
Yeah, that's great. So, how did it all come about, Jeff?
Well, I was born. No, I began my career in safety in around 92-ish. And hadn't really given safety a thought and really hadn't by 92-ish. In fact, I had trained as a first aid attendant. And then when I was employed in that capacity, what they really wanted was prevention, compliance, and safety. And so, my career from then up until around 2010, to me, really matched kept pace with the evolution of safety management in the construction sector, in that, early on, there was a real cause and effect relationship between the things we did to improve safety and their obvious outcomes. But, 20 years down that road, terrific career I'm so grateful for. And yet, I couldn't really draw that line anymore. I was director of safety. I was administrator of a program over multiple work sites, but that cause and effect linkage, the benefit we were bringing was completely obscured to me, and some things started happening in the jurisdiction that again caused me to reflect on what we were doing in safety management. Somebody I had previously worked with was killed in an accident, and we had 2 very high-profile explosions here in lumber mills in 2012, and so that was the huge, change point, I think, in my career. Is that in 2012, after 20 years in conventional safety, I thought there had to be something more. Didn't know what it was, but I knew I wasn't going to find it staying where I was, and so on leap year 2012, I made the leap to step away from that position and take the risk of going into what at the time was uncharted waters. To me, it was uncharted waters. So once that change was made, I wasn't aware of any of this new view discussion or safety differently discussion or safety 2 discussion. And I began with bringing leadership, some leadership thinking, leadership ideas out to the front lines. I had the benefit of being a part of a lot of executive team discussions around leadership concepts and principles, and we'd talk about all that, and it was terrific. Learned so much in those sessions, but they were boardroom sessions. And so when I went out trying to, make a different kind of difference, one of the first things was to take, the best bits of that leadership discussion and take them out to frontline leaders who are out there, boots on the ground, where their leadership skills were really critically important. So it began there, and then very quickly I discovered safety differently, and then every all the time since then has been spent learning as much as possible and checking all the references, reading many references and citations, and going down all those rabbit holes, and just trying to grasp all of this information that's been coming online, the last 8 or 10 years. Well, for me, so began catching up, I think. Obviously, the new view is not new, right? So in 2012, I began catching up on, the lineage of all these ideas. And for me, learning teams really didn't come along until maybe 4 years ago. I'm guessing 3 or 4 years ago, it emerged. The concept emerged as a tool, and it just, I think it really was like, it was a real boost. It was really needed to complete the view we were having, or to certainly now I'm mostly interested in integration and hop integration and exactly how we do that. And I think that learning teams is by far and away the most significant activity that happens on that journey.
Right, because do you think it sort of tries to help to humanize?
Well, I absolutely. But and it's the pre-work. It's that I believe very much that a really proper conceptual foundation has to be laid before we go there. At least that's my approach, is that we strive to ensure that we have so much dialogue around the concepts and the principles. And I think that when if we're talking about an organization and we're talking about their senior leaders, managers, once we're at about maybe a 60% fluency rate or 60% buy-in, if you will, I think is the perfect time to coach them in having their first learning team in-house, because the results of that just really come back around and kind of prove the points in their own language, in their own terms, in their own house. And you'll know when we haven't sufficiently gotten to that point in the minds of the leaders. An organization has gone and conducted their first learning team, and when the results were brought back, the senior leadership team was really arguing with those results and having a difficult time accepting that could be true or what that was about. So there's a real indicator that not enough time was spent in the preparation, I think, to really tee that up for success. Because contrast that with the experience in some other orgs, that when you're at that, whatever ballpark 60% buy-in spot, and you convene a learning team and you come back and you table these results, and incredible response to people learning how much there is to learn in their own organization. And that's such a huge aha moment.
Thank you, listeners, for being part of this podcast. We would love to hear your learnings or other topics you would like us to explore about learning teams. Go to www.podcastlearnings.com and give us your feedback. Become part of the community of practice with learning teams. Go to www.learningteamscommunity.com. Support the authors of The Practice of Learning Teams. Purchase the book from Amazon.com or go to www.learningteamsbook.com for an inside look and other free book resources from the authors.
The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are those of the host and its guest and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the company. Examples of analysis discussed within this podcast are only examples. They should not be utilized in the real world as the only solution available, as they are based only on very limited and dated open source information. Assumptions made within this analysis are not reflective of the position of the company. No part of this podcast may be reproduced, stored in a retrieval system, or transmitted in any form or by any means, mechanical, electronic, recording, or otherwise, without prior written permission of the creator of the podcast, Jay Allen.